Today we're going to talk about the history of life on Earth, and there's many different theories and ideas behind it, and so we're going to try to address all of them today. But one of the things that we first have to look at is the evidence behind where these theories come from. So Earth has been around for a long time, and one of the things that we look at is a combination of what's called relative dating and radiometric or radioactive dating. Relative dating is looking at rock layers that are consecutive. So if we look at like the Grand Canyon, we can see many different rock layers and see how life has changed in those rock layers. We use a combination of geology and biology. So in geology, there's what's called the law of superposition, which says that the closer the rock layers are towards the top, those are newer compared to those that are towards the bottom. And then the biology is looking at how life has changed within those rock layers, and also being able to look at the life that is found in each and or among those layers. Radioactive dating is where we can give an actual birthday or a number to how old those rocks are. And so if you are wondering, how do we come up with these numbers? Do they just randomly make them up, scientists? No, they're able to use different radiometric dating from uranium or carbon to figure out approximately how old these things actually are. And so if we look at, what are some of the ideas that are out there of where life came to be? So many people have a religious side, whatever religion that might be, and we'll get into those. But then what are some other ideas of how life could have gotten here? Where did it come from? What was that initial heartbeat of life? And so we got to take a step back further and talk about how the theory of where our systems came from is what's known as the Big Bang Theory, where you have this explosion of matter and mass and elements and compounds and all these things. And it started to form little space neighborhoods, where those space neighborhoods would get their own gravity. Other stuff would join other stuff and create bigger stuff. And eventually the word is called coalesce into planets, into planetesimals, dwarf planets, and potentially create larger planets with moons and satellites and those types of things. And that all was a huge explosion of energy. And so with that, you have a lot of fire and flame and inhospitable planets that wouldn't be good for life. But as life came to be, and specifically on Earth, and we get that matter that starts to coalesce and create a little, small region of gas and dust and ice, eventually you get gravity and you get other things that are going to join and create this mass or this ball, but still a lot of energy, and Earth had not cooled at the time. And so this image that you're seeing is that idea of coalescing with the solar system and the 8 planets and the asteroid belt and all the things that make up our solar system. Another major event that was thought to happen is when Earth collided with another planetesimal, so a dwarf Earth and another dwarf planet collided, and potentially gave rise to what we now have as the moon, but then also adding more matter to early Earth. So early Earth was not very friendly. It was thought to have a lot of noxious or poisonous gases that if you and I were to step outside, we wouldn't do well at all. We'd be dead in a matter of minutes. However, as Earth started to cool and as we started to release gases, it created our atmosphere, which was very, very important because that then served as a source of protection as Earth was bombarded by a lot of early asteroids and those types of things that really life maybe was able to take hold, but maybe wouldn't have lasted because of these constant impacts and this emission of energy from these explosions that would happen. Having said that, the stage was set, and even those noxious or nasty gases still had the main ingredients for life. And so we have talked about before how life is made out of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. And so all of those things were in the atmosphere. And along with those gases and those elements being available, there was also a lot of energy. And so there's a very famous experiment that was done by Miller and Urey, where they tried to simulate these nasty gases, shock them with electricity, that being the energy that was provided by the atmosphere, and then have a condensing, so a cooling that would take place. And it didn't take long for them, by even shocking them with those things like hydrogen, methane, ammonia that you're seeing there in the top right, they were able to get very early forms of amino acids, of fatty acid chains, of nucleotides. And those things like to hang out with other things of the same. And so we started to get things like protocells, little cells, little circles of fats that might have been the early forms of life, but maybe not life yet. And so what we look at fossil record-wise is we look at things that are called protocells. Those are the things that I was mentioning. But then also, because that early atmosphere was not real hospitable for life, UV rays, the ozone might not have been there in full swing. So then you have, mutations that could take place. But when the ozone started to form and now we're protected by UV rays, that's maybe where life was able to really get going. However, prior to that, they feel that life originated in water and specifically in seas. Now, why is that? Well, we know that all living things require water. And not only that, but we also know that water has a protective buffer to it, if you will. And early life was thought to give rise or to have originated in those. And so what you're looking at there is what's called a stromatolite. And think of them as like a rock that's kind of like a mushroom. And if you cut that rock and look on the inside, kind of like rings on a tree, you notice these different layerings and these different banding patterns. These were thought to be some of our earliest organisms, these primitive bacteria that maybe was the first sign of life that we had on Earth in shallow oceans, protected by water, and not exposed to ultraviolet radiation. So the thought is that once life really started to get going, it was able to do quite well. So this is oftentimes known as the Cambrian Explosion, where you get early life forms. But two major trends that we see is that life started off simple and it got more and more complex. It also allowed us to change the atmosphere, and that's what allowed that oxygen to accumulate. And so those are two major trends, not just simple to complex, but also needing water, requiring water, and then being able to colonize and live onto land. And so we also see that in our diversity of life. So we look at bacteria being our simplest prokaryotes, protists being a lot of single-celled eukaryotes, and then now our more advanced things that live on planet Earth. And we also see that trends even within these. So plants being mainly aquatic, being able to move on to land. Animals being mainly aquatic and then being able to move on to land. And so along with organisms, complexity increasing, we also see them being able to move on to land and adapt to be able to do so. That still, though, doesn't explain how we go from, this bunch of gases to Miller and Urey's experiment to life. And this, for me, is the most challenging part of a science teacher is what is that initial heartbeat that happened? Not literal heartbeat, because there probably wasn't a heart yet. It probably started with a single cell. Was it a shock of electricity? Was it a lightning bolt? Was it a volcanic explosion? Was it something else that brought life here? And so if we think about some of the other ideas, the number one thing that we have to look at, of course, is the religious side. And it's not just, Christian, but many religions across the entire planet have this idea of a higher being providing life to our planet. And you can kind of look at, like, if you are of the Hindu religion, Lord Brahma is known as the god of creation. If you are Christian, the idea of God created the universe and plants and animals and humans. If you're a Muslim, they're a combination of creationism, but evolution. And so Darwin, remember, is the guy that's famous for all of this because he kind of stuck his neck out there when religion was the number one belief. But now most religions have kind of accepted this idea that there maybe was a creationist side, but we also know that life is adaptable, that life is able to change. So it's not you have to be this or you have to be that. It can be a combination of the two. Other ideas of how maybe life came to be, spontaneous generation. Maybe that life just randomly arose from non-living things. And that kind of goes with the idea of the theory of chemical evolution, that these chemicals eventually would have provided the ingredients for life. Cosmozoic theory is that life came from another planet or another space object. Maybe it was a comet or an asteroid. Theory of catastrophism. This is a combination of intelligent design or religion, that maybe there have been several catastrophes that have been done by a higher being. And then you also have the alien life origin. Maybe there were aliens that brought life to planet Earth. All of these have portions of evidence for them. Scientists, the most evidence is in that theory of chemical evolution, then leading to our heartbeat of life, if you will. But even as a science teacher, even as someone that maybe thinks about science or agrees with science, there are still some gray areas to that. And that's kind of the wonder of this whole topic of where life came to be. In addition, we still look at the fossil record to help us point in the right direction of where life came to be. And not only that, but we also can look at extreme areas of life and try to figure out where life came to be. But it's one of the most unanswered questions, and it really leads to the wonder of science.